Reformed Faces Session 2. Some people might ask, how come I have never heard of what is that thing called? The Westminster Confession of Faith. And what is this shorter catechism? Is that something Roman Catholic or what? What are these confessions and catechisms? Well, let's first clarify background. Indeed, the Roman Catholic Church has catechisms, and so do the Lutheran churches. And so the term catechism has nothing to do with Catholic doctrine. The term catechism is simply a question and answer format. Now, the second factor by way of background is that there are many churches that claim that they have no confessions or catechisms. It doesn't mean they do not have positions on doctrine, but they claim that we have no creed. An outstanding example would be the Southern Baptist Convention in the United States. They would claim very loudly that we have no creeds, and then they publish 2 or 3 creeds or doctrinal statements immediately, but they wouldn't call them creeds. They would call them testimony or some other name. So those churches that claim that they have no creed are non-confessional. They don't have a confession. That is to say, they don't have an official confession of faith, which they require ministers to subscribe to. However, almost all Protestants, worthy of the name, believe in certain creeds, such as the Nicene Creed, 325, the Chalcedon Creed, 451 AD. You see, when the early church faced heresies, wrong doctrine, they went through a long process of controversy, and at the end, at these conferences, at these councils, they adopted certain creeds about the Trinity and about the person of Christ, the Nicene Creed and the Chalcedon Creed, to name 2. During the Reformation, Luther and Calvin and other leaders of the Reformation movement studied the Bible, and they studied the Bible both in terms of books of the Bible and in terms of topics, which they call loci, L-O-C-I, and they were roundly criticized by the Catholics as saying, you Protestants, you have no tradition, you have no root. Well, Luther and Calvin, people like that, responded, yes, we do. We simply are going back to what the early church fathers believed. And of course, they wrote down their confessions and catechisms. In Holland, one of the earliest Reformed confessions is called the Belgic Confession. The church in Geneva had its own as well. Then the Swiss churches had one called Confession Helvetica. These were some of the earliest confessions of faith. Then the Reformed churches in Germany wrote what is called the Heidelberg Catechism. And the Dutch churches, in response to the remonstrances by the Arminian party, wrote the Canons of Dort at the end of the Council of Dort. Now, these are some of the European doctrinal statements: the Belgic Confession, the Helvetica Consensus, Canons of Dort, Heidelberg Catechism. Well, the Reformed churches in England were ostracized, persecuted, etc., by the monarch for decades, until finally a political revolution took place after 1640. And so during that time, when the king was overthrown, Parliament, the House of Commons, asked ministers from England and some from Scotland to write a confession of faith, because now we're no longer Anglican. What are we? What is this Church of England? What is it? What do we believe? And so these pastors and some elders met for years, not every day, of course, but they met for over a number of years, and they wrote down what is called the Westminster Confession of Faith, the Westminster Larger Catechism, and the Westminster Shorter Catechism between the years 1643 and 1647. They also wrote something called Directory of Worship and Rules of Discipline. The Westminster Confession and Catechisms became adopted by other Reformed churches all over the United Kingdom, as well as in the United States, and later on in all over the world as missionaries were sent out. The meaning of confession and catechism is that it gives the church a summary of what the Bible teaches, a summary of the system of doctrine taught in Scripture. Now, for Presbyterians, we are required to subscribe. That is to say, we are required to write down that we agree with the system of belief in the Westminster Confession and the two catechisms. We believe that they represent the system of doctrine taught in the Bible. Again, why are Chinese Christians so unfamiliar with these confessions and catechisms? Well, we need to take a look at the missionaries, Presbyterian, Congregational, and Reformed missionaries that went to China and Taiwan after the Opium War. The church, the Presbyterian Church in England, as well as the Congregational Church, became rather liberal after 1800, thanks to the influence of Immanuel Kant and other liberal theologians. While in the United States, the Presbyterian Church came under the influence of liberal theology between the years 1880 and 1930. So while some Reformed missionaries did a diligent job teaching their Chinese converts and churches the catechism and confessions, such as in Fujian and perhaps some in Shandong, by and large, many of these Presbyterian Reformed missionaries wanted to engage in cooperation with other denominations, so they began to minimize the doctrinal distinctives of their own denomination. And so by the time the Hymns of Universal Praise, 普天颂赞, was published in 1936, there was a companion volume called 普天崇拜, Universal Worship. And in that manual of worship, they did not include the Reformed Confession and Catechism, but only had the Apostles' Creed. And so the Presbyterian distinctives, the Westminster Confession and the Catechisms, were not passed down effectively through what we would call the Chinese Presbyterian churches, such as the Church of Christ in China, 中华基督教会. Now, Taiwan Presbyterian Church has a different history. Another factor why Chinese Christians have not heard of the confessions and catechisms is not only that the missionaries minimize their own distinctives because they want to cooperate with other denominations while everybody became more liberal. Another factor is the kind of training a missionary, an American missionary, received before he or she sailed for China between the years 1900 and 1950. A scholar by the name of Cyril Bates, Carle Bates, wrote an article called The Theology of Missionaries in China, 1900 to 1950, in a book called The Missionary Enterprise in China and America, edited by John King Fairbank. And Bates said that the average United States missionary who went to China during the first half of the 20th century took 3 courses. In Britain, you call 3 papers. 3 courses in religion, could be Bible, ethics, maybe doctrine, at a Christian or church college. Now, you compare that with the United States pastor who did not go abroad as a missionary. Well, he had 3 full years of theology after college or after university. 3 years as compared with 3 courses. And so, of course, the missionaries were not well equipped to teach the Bible and to teach doctrine in China. Some of the earliest converts who became pastors in China were not highly educated people. And then by the time the Church of Christ in China was organized in 1927, the leaders were liberal theologians. At the same time, missionaries came to China from many of these non-confessing non-confessing churches sent missionaries to China, Baptist, Brethren, and so on. And in China, several revival movements broke out, particularly from 1927 all the way to 1945. And so whatever Reformed influence was left in these Presbyterian churches in China, they were all caught up in the revival movement, which featured speakers such as John Sung, Wang Mingda, Watchman Nee, and later on Timothy Zhao, Zhao Shiguang, and Andrew Ji Zhiwen. And so even where churches were started by Reformed missionaries, such as Dutch Reformed missionaries in Indonesia, Reformed church tradition became mixed with Chinese revivalism. Meanwhile, there were all kinds of wars, particularly the Japanese occupation of many of these Asian countries from 1937, 1945, Communist Revolution of 1949, and then immigration overseas. So every time you have a war or revolution, people migrate and the churches start all over again with almost no exposure to the historical confessions and creeds. My prayer is Chinese churches would grow toward maturity, understanding the tremendous, majestic system of doctrine taught in the Bible, that we might adopt some of the fruit of the Reformation as our confession, so that we might have some kind of a safe foundation just to protect the quality of preaching and teaching in the church. That is why many of us have never heard of it, but yet it is important for the future. You don't have to subscribe to a confession to be saved, to go to heaven. But I'm afraid it is necessary for church to become mature unto the full stature of Christ. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 to 16.